but the police minister, Bheki Cele, has acknowledged that the latest crime statistics paint a bleak picture of the country. Cele led a police delegation to Parliament where they briefed the Portfolio Committee on the crime statistics for the period from April last year to the end of March this year. Murder has gone up by nearly 700 cases, bringing the total to 21,022. Sexual offences have increased by more than 2,000, bringing the total to 52,420. This means 58 people are murdered every day and 144 sexual offences committed on a daily basis. For reaction on the crime stats, we speak to Siphelele Ngobese, South African Cities Network researcher. A very good morning to you. What's your initial reaction to these crime stats?
Morning to you, and thank you for having me on your show. Our initial reaction would be that before we even had the opportunity to interact with the stats, in that every year we then take what comes out of the national and then aggregate it to the city level, is that it's unsurprising, and that's unfortunate, in that it reinforces that as a country we continue to be in a constant state of violence and a constant state of fear. And so it's unsurprising that murders are up and sexual offences are up. And I mean, with the recent events we've seen in our country, with young women having lost their lives to intimate partner violence, we would say and once again drive the point home that we need to start engaging with the social issues and how we, even though we may not personally engage in what we think is violence, how our society enables violence. And I think we need to start looking at it in a more holistic way. That would be our reaction on that one.
These statistics are essentially after the fact, a reflection of what has been happening in society. How do they reflect on the efficacy of the South African Police Service?
Once again, I would say that we need to start having a holistic view of issues of crime and violence beyond just policing. As we've said, and I think with recent events in our country, we are seeing that policing alone cannot be the main response, and that it needs a more holistic and societal kind of approach where we start dealing with the social drivers, we start dealing with the economic drivers of crime and violence. So it's not something that can be solved, we think, through a policing-centric approach. It needs to be an all-of-society engagement around our relationship with crime and violence and how, whether individually or collectively, and the ways we enable violence in our society. So thinking about issues of violence, masculinity, those are not things that can be immediately policed, and those are not things that people can be arrested for. But what are the things that happen every day? What are the kinds of conversations and the words and the vocabulary we are using that enable violence, even if, again, as I said, we don't see ourselves as people who engage in violence, but how do we enable those people who do engage in violence to feel that in our society it's acceptable to do certain kinds of things.
So one of the conversations that have come out in the country recently, especially with regard to the conversation around South Africans back and forth with foreign nationals, is the infiltration of drugs. What do you think? Do you think this has contributed in any way to these shocking statistics?
I wouldn't, without having the opportunity to have analyzed the crime statistics and researched what's happening, be able to respond right away and draw a clear correlation between these events and what we're seeing now in crime statistics. As an organization and as an institution, we do try to drive this point home of evidence-based policies and actions. And I think for us that would require further study to really draw the clear correlation. And I think in terms of how our systems work, there's a need to start engaging at that level, at the level of knowledge, at the level of conversation and understanding what's happening from an empirical kind of way before you can make the call about what you do. Because there's this challenge of if you're asking the wrong questions, you're surely going to get the wrong answers and then put in place the wrong kinds of interventions and solutions. So I think it goes back to a point of knowledge. Although I think we're under pressure to kind of find solutions that work and to kind of define the problem and say this is what is causing the problem, we do need to have that level of, or that ability to step back and study the problem and understand the problem so that our solutions can be effective and responsive to what's happening. So although I do understand that communities are challenged with issues of drugs, and again, it does weave into the broader problems we have with crime, I wouldn't say crime and violence, I wouldn't attribute crime and violence to nationality, and as far as South Africans are this and foreign nationals are that. So I think I would want us to be careful around ascribing criminality by nationality, and understand that even without foreign nationals, we as a society have a problem of crime and violence, and if we approach it from that way, and of course there might be merit in investigating what the contribution is of migration. Cities are struggling with migration and rapid urbanization. That might be a contributing factor, but we need to study how and in what ways before we make a call as to what the contribution is.
So the minister was saying that as much as there was a spike in robberies and murder, but the one surprising factor was the increasing incidence of young-on-young violence resulting in murders sometimes.
And it's a terrible indictment on our society, but what our research has found and what research in other parts of the world has found is that young people, especially young black males, are both the biggest victims and the biggest perpetrators of crime and violence, and we must understand that. So we must engage with their victimhood as well as we engage with them, and without trying to problematize young people or criminalize young people. We need to start to understand the issues, because I think there might be a future challenge in also just engaging with young people as the problem, which our systems and our societies often do. So I think it's important to look at it in both ways. Young people are often the most excluded in our societies, excluded from decision making, excluded from sharing ideas, and it's important not to look at them as the problem, because arising from these exclusions that they experience, they then become vulnerable, and evidence does show that they are the biggest victims of crime, in as much as in terms of the incidence of crime, they are demographically the biggest perpetrators. So again, I think it's an important moment to start to engage with long-term solutions to crime and violence. As I said, I think we need to move away from this model of thinking that policing and crime prevention from a policing perspective can be the only solution. You need to start engaging with young men around masculinity, engaging with them around alternative forms of self-expression and alternative forms of conflict resolution beyond just policing, which, again, I think it's important to start to think about in what ways are our systems also violent in their response to issues, in what ways are our systems reinforcing this relationship we have with violence, even in our reactions, even in the way systems respond to these issues. What is it that is inherently violent there? And we need to broaden our understanding of what is violence, because we tend to be very one-dimensional in thinking that violence is only physical, that violence is only verbal. It's also systemic.
So, Siphelele, we are time tight, but I just want to ask you one last question. It has been an ongoing conversation, and the minister brought it up today, saying that South Africa is the only country on the continent that releases crime stats. What's the value and the benefit of crime stats in the fight against crime in South Africa?
I would Right away, I would say it's because information, data, understanding the problem is critical. And with the right information, you can then ask the right questions and have the right solutions. So, for example, there's this narrative, and to some extent it might be true, that South Africa is the rape capital of the continent and of the world. But what we sometimes fail to understand, that's by virtue of an increase in reporting. Not to say that rates of rape are high or low in South Africa. It's just that in 1994, reporting of this kind of crime was better enabled, and so there was a swell of reporting. I wouldn't be so quick to say that South Africa, for example, has the highest rates of rape on the continent. What I would say is that South Africa has the higher rate of reporting of this type of crime. And so I think it's a good way to look at the value of information and the value of understanding the problem from a knowledge perspective. So it's very important to continue to collect this kind of information and this kind of data.
Let's thank you for your time this morning. Siphelele Ngobese is with the South African Cities Network.